Bethesda proudly brings you Campbell Live.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight a special guest, the Prime Minister on Dotcom, John Banks and the Americans. This time last Friday we broke the story of John Banks and Dotcom, the donations, the parties, the forgotten helicopter rides. Since then every politician we've asked for an interview has turned us down. But on Wednesday, the Prime Minister didn't receive our interview request, and tonight he responds to the questions we raised in that program. In short, why did he know so little about an operation for the FBI conducted in his electorate with a special tactics group using semi-automatic weapons to arrest a man charged with internet piracy, an operation that led to a $1 billion business being closed down? When this was such an unprecedented operation for the US, and so many people around him knew, why was the Prime Minister not informed? One point before we start, we categorically accept the Prime Minister's assurance that his electorate office did not pass on the details of local constituents who had visited his office to discuss Dotcom. But there are so many other questions surrounding that raid and what we've learned subsequently about John Banks, those donations, and who knew what and when. I began by asking John Key when he first heard of Dotcom.
So, the best of my recollection knowledge, the first time I ever heard about the guy was the day that David Collins, the Solicitor General, briefed me with the Attorney General the day before the raid on Dotcom. So what happened was, that particular night, there was a meeting set up between the Solicitor General and Attorney General. It was in my diary. I was to go to that meeting. It was in my office, and there was no subject title or whatever. I asked a few people, what's the meeting about? They said, honestly, we don't know. I sat down. The Solicitor General said, look, there's this raid that's happening. This is the guy's name. He actually went to the lengths of saying, don't Google him because, you know, people will be looking. But basically, cut a long story short, what is going to happen is that this raid is going to take place. We've been working on it for some time.
How long had they been working on it for?
Well, I'm probably not in a position to talk about that. But basically,
months.
Well, that's really not relevant.
It is relevant, isn't it?
Well, who knows how long it actually takes them to get all that information. But all I can tell you is that they came as a matter of courtesy to tell me. Now,
right.
what's interesting is...
I just want to come back to how long they've been working on it for. Ballpark figure. 6 months, a year, longer?
Don't know, can't remember.
Can I go through the list of people we believe knew about
Yeah, sure.
Dotcom and his somewhat controversial / problematic presence?
As you did the other night, so let's run through it.
So let's run through it very fast. Simon Power and some officials.
Yep.
Jonathan Coleman and some officials. The Solicitor General's Office, Crown Law, New Zealand Police, the Attorney General, the Organised and Financial Crime Agency of New Zealand, Nigel Bickle and an unknown number of people under him at Immigration New Zealand, your electorate office, Maurice Williamson, John Banks, Hillary Clinton, the US Department of Justice, the FBI, the US Attorney General's Office, senior members of the US Police Force, but not you.
Correct. So let's run through each of those just very quickly as we can. So in the case of the raid, what's important to understand and recognise in New Zealand is the police have complete independent powers. In fact, the worrying thing would be if any Prime Minister or a politician tried to interfere with that. It's quite against the law.
I couldn't agree more,
right.
Except you run a no surprises regime, don't you?
Well, we do, but the police don't come to me about their operations. They never come to me about their operations.
Even what are effectively foreign operations on New Zealand soil. This was an FBI operation and the FBI were at the Coatesville mansion on the day of the raid.
Yeah, so the police didn't tell me. The Solicitor General came to me. I think the Solicitor General came because he knew that this was a very high-profile incident, right? So he knew that was obviously going to hit the media, and I think they felt an obligation to tell me that so that I wasn't blindsided the next day. But the police never spoke to me and never would speak to me. And in fact, you know, if they'd come to me a lot earlier, what would be the point in that? Would it be for me to potentially interfere? Well, that might be appropriate in some countries, but it's not in New Zealand. So in that case, as I say, the unusual thing was they briefed me, not that they hadn't briefed me in the past. So that was that one. In terms of his immigration applications, well, I just don't get involved in immigration cases unless they are my... And, you know, I'm advocating for them in my lecture. And there's thousands of those, millions actually, over time.
Yeah. Everyone wants to come to New Zealand. What makes Dotcom very interesting, I think, in this respect, is he is only the 10th immigrant ever to gain residency through the Investor Plus scheme, which was Jonathan Coleman's baby. Let's cut to the chase and say it hasn't been an overwhelming success story.
It's a public policy. I supported that public policy.
Absolutely.
I couldn't
Jonathan
name you.
Coleman didn't come to you and say, whoopee, we've got number 10, and he's bought $10 million of government bonds, and he's a big guy, and he's as nutty as a fruitcake, but he's in the country through the Investor Plus scheme.
No, and I couldn't name the other 9. Wouldn't have a clue who those are. The immigration test, when he got immigration status, that was a decision made by the officials. So they looked at him and they said, well, look, in broad principle, yes, he's got this record, but the record's not overly significant. It was very old and historic. They went to the German police and said, can you clarify that or corroborate his story that it was a long time ago, it was all okay? Yeah. They said yes.
Basically clean slate out of Germany.
Clean slate out of Germany. So they then went to, you see, and you can get a clean slate for that, right? So they then went along to the minister, I think, and said, look, just as a matter of record, we've signed off on this, but we're letting you know.
Absolutely.
That is different to the test under the Overseas Investment Office.
Absolutely.
And that's because the test there is a different test.
And it's a test that Maurice Williamson thought Kim.com had passed.
Yeah. Well, I haven't had great discussions with Maurice about it.
Why not?
Overly, because that doesn't matter, because in the end...
It does. It really does matter, because this gets to the heart of what seems to me to be an inexplicable series of coincidences.
Yeah, so let me just explain that one. So I haven't had great discussions with Maurice about what and when, because in the end, the position that Maurice and Simon agreed on was they turned down.
Sorry, Prime Minister, sorry. Can I just go on the record here and say, why haven't you had a great discussion with Maurice Williamson? Because he seems absolutely critical to this, because he determined that Kim.com was a tick in the yes box.
Yeah, so the reason I was going to say, if you allow me to finish it, would be this, and that is that I'm pretty sure Simon Power had some different information to Maurice Williamson.
What was the different information?
I'm not sure I'm in a position to say that at this point, but all I can tell you is he has some different information. And at what point they shared that, I don't know.
Do you know what the different information was?
It was about some other convictions.
What other convictions?
Well, I'm not going to go through those at this point.
OK. Serious convictions?
They're convictions.
Okay.
And I think
these
what
aren't
happened,
small insider trading convictions in Hong Kong, are they?
They are.
OK, what was the fine he got? Was it $1,200?
Yeah, so the point is...
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So a man who has got residency, has been approved by Maurice Williamson, is derailed on the basis of a $1,200 fine in Hong Kong. And what you and I both know is that Kim.com went to the authorities in Hong Kong and said, look, I seem to have bought too many shares in this company. I'll sell down and declare I'm doing that. It was a pro forma fine in the circumstances. It's not enough to upend his application, is it?
Well, it is actually. So what happened was, in between him getting his application for residency, where that information wasn't known, so that's why he got his residency, he then went through the OIO process. Now, I don't know, as I say, I haven't bothered talking to Maurice about it, and I haven't had discussions with Simon about it. But what I have seen is the registration of that interest, or that conviction, which took place after the approval for residency. Okay. And what I think happened...
So, let me finish this, I think this is an important point. Absolutely.
Simon Power is very conservative. Simon Power was a very conservative minister. Actually, a bloody great minister, but a very conservative minister. He's Minister of Justice. This guy was convicted many, many, many years ago for insider trading and other things that were wiped away.
Clean slate.
Exactly. But under the good character test, you can't get that for... that can't be swept away. You effectively can for the purposes of immigration test, but not for this test. And if you want my view, and I don't know because Simon's not with us anymore, so I'm bothered, I think Simon saw the later conviction and said, I don't know, I just don't feel right about this. That's what I think happened.
Have you asked him?
He's not there anymore, and they turned it down.
So the Prime Minister has still not discussed this matter with Simon Power or Maurice Williamson, but he is certain that neither of them raised it with him. After the break, the second part of our interview, Warner Brothers, the police raid, John Banks and those cheques. On the 9th of March 2010, Simon Power met with Mike Ellis of the Motion Picture Association of America. Did you know about that meeting?
No.
Mike Ellis, I went to Film Journal International to find a bit about who Mike Ellis is. Man on a mission across Asia-Pacific. The MPA's Mike Ellis pursues pirates and politics, I quote. Since 1999, Ellis has been charged with combating piracy in the digital age. His job description states he is liaising with government bodies and law enforcement agencies worldwide.
Yep.
So this guy came down to New Zealand and met with Simon Power.
Well, if you're telling me yes, but I wouldn't know. Ministers had thousands of meetings.
But the OIO had said Kim.com was A-OK. Morris Williamson had said Kim.com was A-OK. Simon Power was the only person who said he wasn't A-OK.
Yeah, well, I think, firstly, I mean, if you take this guy, you've got to remember what Simon's job was, which was he was going through the rewrite of Section 92 of the Copyright Act.
Absolutely.
So the whole issue of piracy and intellectual property is a massive issue.
Prime Minister...
And when you say Simon Power is the only person that said no, look, my understanding of the way that process works, not specific to Dotcom, but any of them is, the ministers look, they'll probably look from their own portfolio angle, justice and in this case land. They look at the various different issues, though I'm sure they'll probably get advice from their officials. They in the end go away and have a discussion. And yes, there are different personalities, and Simon is a truly conservative personality. He will have looked at Dotcom, and I'd say he'll say, look, there are convictions in the past. He knew there was a conviction in Hong Kong. He would have said, on the sniff test, it probably just doesn't feel right.
So on July 18th, Simon Power vetoes approval for Dotcom to buy the land.
Well, no, actually both of them do.
No. Simon Power goes on the 18th and Morris Williamson goes on the 23rd. He changes his mind 5 days later. Do you remember where you were then?
What year is it?
Just 2011, July 18th to July 23rd, that period. So Power vetoes it, Williamson changes his mind and joins Power in declining application.
No idea.
So you were up in LA meeting with Warner Brothers.
Yeah, it was great. We had a great dinner together at the Kelowna Hotel.
Why?
Why? Oh, because they'd made The Hobbits in New Zealand.
But you'd just seen them weeks earlier in New Zealand.
Oh, you know, what happened was, it wasn't weeks earlier, it was quite a lot earlier. What happened was when they came down to New Zealand and we went through all the negotiations, which we did, which are public record these days, I said to them, I'm going to go and see President Obama. And when I do, I will come through the West Coast, because we always do.
Did they mention Kim.com?
No.
They didn't mention Kim.com?
No. Look, the first time I heard Kim.com's name was from David Collins at this...
OK. Are you happy with the way the raid was conducted? The Special Tactics Group, the Armed Defender Squad, helicopters, semi-automatic weapons?
Well, I haven't sat down with the police and had any discussions ever about that raid. But what I can say is that they would have sat there, obviously, I'm sure, and thought through all of the risks. One thing I do know, because David Collins told me this, that the Crown considered Kim.com to be a substantial flight risk. So they probably figured there were weapons and all sorts of things there. I mean, in the end, these guys have got to protect themselves. And let's be honest, they found them in a safe room with a gun.
Yeah.
Well, they did.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a police, we're not going to send our police officers doing an international raid on the basis
there were the community constable was in the house the day beforehand and was up there all the time, was on first name basis. If you were,
it's a very different proposition going in a dawn raid or whatever they did is very different from a community constable.
Well, Kim.com has always said if the same community constable had turned up and said, "Hey Kim, can you come with me?" he would have gone with him.
Yeah, that's touching. But I'll tell you what, you know, if you were undertaking a major raid where there are other people from overseas, who knows what's going to happen next? We can't take the risk with our police officers.
The FBI were on the ground at that raid, weren't they?
Don't know. Honestly don't know.
Every time I ask you a question which is somewhat contentious, you keep telling me you haven't spoken to Morris Williamson, you haven't spoken to the police, you haven't spoken to Simon Power, you don't know what the date of the raids were, you don't know what the date they first approached us was. You know, what I'm confused about is this extraordinary series of coincidences. The MPAA in New Zealand meeting with Simon Power, you meeting with Warner Brothers, Morris Williamson saying yes, Simon Power saying no, Morris Williamson changing his mind. All of this on the face of it is... Don't you see that that's a startling series of coincidences?
No. I mean, look, you might want to create a great conspiracy for your listeners tonight, and that's great. They can look at... But let's go through the facts just very quickly as we can. In New Zealand, the police have complete separation of powers, and if the Prime Minister started interfering in that, there would be major problems. So I don't get briefed. So I got briefed as a raid because it's cross-border. In the case of where people buy property or sell property or buy property, as part of the Overseas Investment Office, two ministers have responsibility. They've never come to me, actually, ever in the entire time I've been there, with the possible exception of Crayford Farms. In the case of me seeing Warner Brothers, I made it quite clear I was going to go up through LA, see them, go and see the internet guys. I mean, why wouldn't we go up? They're spending $1 billion here. In the case of the MPAA guy coming here, well, again, as I say, we've been working on those issues of copyright. In the case of me going to ask Simon Power and Morris Williamson now lots of questions, why would I do that? They said no.
OK.
There's no great... I hate to tell you the bad news. There's no great conspiracy. The facts are that Dotcom is someone the United States thinks they've broken the law. He's somebody that they're trying to extradite to the United States. That's where it starts and finishes.
Let's have a look at this just to end on a farcical note. Cheques number 1031 and 1032, both signed on the same day from the same account into Team Banksy 2010 for $25,000 each. Why is there two cheques of $25,000?
Okay, well, the answer is I can't tell you, but the...
Have you asked John Banks?
No.
Why not?
Okay, because what I've asked him is the most salient point.
No. The most salient point is why is there two cheques of $25,000?
No, it's not the most salient point. The most salient point is, did he comply with the Local Electoral Act? And the answer is, well, that's the truth of it. And the answer is, he's given me a cast iron assurance that he did. Now, if he didn't comply with the Local Electoral Act, he'd be gone and he'd be subject to a major police prosecution, one would have thought. But the point of the thing is that he's given me an assurance. So what you're saying is you don't like the Local Electoral Act. You might not, but that was the way the model works.
I'm not saying that at all.
TV3 themselves said, actually, just to finish this point, TV3 themselves said, when those cheques, because I don't know, I just watch your show some nights. So on TV3, they said that those cheques were deposited in Queenstown and they would have shown up as being totally anonymous.
Two cheques of $25,000 each. Bloody odd thing to do, isn't it? I mean, what other explanation is there than John Banks told them to write out two cheques of $25,000?
Well, the interesting thing is there'd be no particular reason on an anonymous donation to change it. If it's anonymous, it's anonymous.
Two cheques of $25,000 each.
But
would you remember a helicopter trip to Coatesville?
Well, probably because I haven't taken one. But the point is, John himself, you can't fire a minister.
No.
You can't fire a minister for holding a bad press conference and taking legal advice.
What about his competency to be a minister when he can't remember really significant events?
Well, he himself says, look, he should have fronted up on that day and given you the straight answers. But if you're asking me, do I believe he legally complied with the Local Electoral Act on all the information I have, which is the cast iron insurance he gave me, the answer is yes.
Prime Minister John Key, I've really enjoyed having this conversation.
Good.
Thank you.
Hope it's been enlightening.
It's been enlightening, yes.
I hate to say, but there is lots of things happening in government. There's a million things going on. Despite the fact that some forensic analysis goes through and you think can join dots or others, the facts of life are we all deal with a million issues every day and we don't talk to ourselves about things we don't need to get engaged in.
Prime Minister John Key.